Hi, my name is Laura Griffin, and my group members are Brad Williams and Cody Cruz. We are all three teachers at Harlem High School, located in Harlem, Georgia, which is a part of the Columbia County School District. For all three of us, Harlem is the only school at which we have taught. Brad has been a teacher at Harlem for the past 12 years, while Cody and I have both taught closer to 7 years. In order to discuss the history of our school, we must first discuss the origin of Harlem, Georgia. While the population of Harlem is continuously growing, it is still considered a small, mostly rural town where the high school is intimately connected to the overall community. Harlem, Georgia was officially established in 1870 by a pair of railroad workers who were fed up with living in the nearby town of Sawdust. Sawdust served as a key stop on the railroad line that connected Augusta and Eatonton, and was known for its high concentration of saloons and brothels. Harlem was established as a less morally corrupt alternative to living in sawdust. The sale of hard liquor was not allowed, and many churches were established in the area, including Keokee Baptist Church, the oldest Baptist church in Georgia, and the current place of worship for many Harlem staff and students. The religious origins of the town of Harlem can be seen reflected in the local schools both back then and today. At the beginning of the 1900s, many small schoolhouses, including Leah, appeared in the area. In total, there were 9 schools for white students and 23 schools for black students, which is interesting because that does not match our current demographics in Columbia County at all. The major focus of many of these academies was agriculture. Here is a picture of the principal of Leah in 1950. He was both the principal and agriculture teacher. All the other teachers in the school were women at the time. Over time, the academies that acted as high schools consolidated. Here is the earliest picture I found of Harlem High School. Unfortunately, there was no date associated with it. Starting in the mid-50s, the population of Augusta began growing exponentially with the construction of Fort Gordon and the DuPont nuclear power plant on the Savannah River. Along with the increase in population came the need for more schools. At first, schools had to hold double sessions in order to accommodate all students, before new structures like the 1962 Harlem School building were built. In the above pictures, you can see how the population of students grew from 1949 to 1982, with the integration of white and black schools occurring sometime between 1962 and 1982. The exact date was difficult to find. The 1982 building is still the location of the modern-day Harlem High School. In terms of other notable events in Harlem's history, all the teachers we interviewed discussed the school shooting that occurred in 1993, where one student was killed and the other injured. This event had a lasting impact on both the school and the Harlem community. For school founders, I could not find any information about administrators during the earliest years of Harlem High School. However, 2 key figures in the growth of the school are Superintendent John Pierce Blanchard and Principal Adams. These 2 individuals held their roles during the period of immense growth in Columbia County. Under Superintendent Blanchard, numerous new school facilities were opened in Columbia County, and he is responsible for turning Harlem High School into a true comprehensive high school. Adams, who was principal at the time, also played a role in this transition. For our interviews, we interviewed Cynthia Armstrong, who attended Harlem High School as a student and graduated in 1985, and then taught math at Harlem High School from 1991 to 2024. We also interviewed Jimmy Waters, who graduated in 2000 and later was hired to teach Spanish at Harlem High School. Today, she is our media specialist. Finally, we interviewed Stephanie Arrington. While she never attended Harlem as a student, she has taught science at Harlem for the past 31 years. In their interviews, all 3 teachers discussed the impacts of Principal Barry Hemphill, Principal Alan Griffin, and Principal Dietmar Perez, who was himself a Harlem graduate. One moment in particular that stood out to me in the interview with Cynthia Armstrong was when she talked about how well Principal Hemphill knew and cared for his students and teachers. She told us about how he compressed the wound of one of the students who was shot until the ambulance arrived.
Hi, I'm Cody. Uh, in terms of the evolution of teaching and educational experiences, in our interviews with Jimmy Waters and Cynthia Armstrong and Stephanie Arrington, each cited less restrictions on how the curriculum was taught, but also less resources, having just a textbook and a curriculum map when they started versus now having, loads of resources thanks to the internet. Jimmy, in particular, cited that there's more standardized testing than there ever has been, and that's put a lot of pressure on teachers and students as well to get through the curriculum faster and focus really on like standards instead of making their own decisions as much about curriculum. For teaching methods, that was mostly shaped by technology. From our interviews, we learned that. Stephanie Arrington in particular shared that she's quoted as saying, "I also think we can explain it and get them to picture it better because you have to come up with different ways of presenting it other than, okay, here's the picture in the book or here's something I can draw." Sometimes you would get books that would have transparencies with it, but you had to be able to explain processes and things because they couldn't see it as well or as easily as they can find it now on the computer. So I think this is a situation of like in the past, you had to be really on top of your game because otherwise there wasn't like a video to help you out. Teachers also had more individual interactions between teachers and students. A lot of them, all of our subjects shared. Particularly Cynthia and Stephanie talked about weekly grade updates on paper rather than online. And so teachers had to talk one-on-one with a student and say, this is what you're missing. They didn't have an online textbook grade book to work off of. Stephanie also made a note of an increased concern for mental health and more individualized education plans, those being more common now. She cited this as something beneficial, but also something she feels is taken advantage of. Perhaps my favorite insight in her interview is her observation that students are given a way out now, not a way through. That's her exact words. She said, yeah, you might have to cope, you might have to work harder at this, whereas maybe you don't have to work as hard at something else. You're not stupid. Maybe this is just something that is hard. I found that to be an amazing insight. Then in terms of facilities and resources, from 1997 to 2003, there was only one addition to the building, according to Jimmy Waters. Part of the bus breezeway was closed to make more science classrooms. The library was remodeled during that time to make room for computers. There was a reading pit that was filled in, so you had more space. And then we got the 900 hall in 2022, in addition to the building that added 2 more science classrooms along with a bunch of other science classrooms. For facilities and resources, the big ones that were talked about between all the subjects were, hey, you had a textbook, you had a curriculum map. Later on, you had more overhead and transparencies. Like transparencies got used a lot. They came with the textbooks, so you would use a lot of those. But also, Stephanie and Cynthia talked about hand crank copiers. I had no idea that there were. Did anybody else in here know about hand crank copiers? Anyone in this class? Apparently, you used to just ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk by hand send out your copies, which was just wild to hear about. That was maybe the most fascinating part of this entire project. Let's talk a little bit about the student and the community, because that was another one that our interviewees had a lot of stuff to talk about. But first, a little bit of hard data. The interviews showed that students had not changed overall, that they were more or less the same, was what you heard from everybody. But the actual census data shows that in 1982, back when the school was founded, 85% of students were, 85% of the Columbia County population was white, 14% was black, and approximately 1% was some other race. That was all the information that the census had. But in the present day, 68% are white, so a pretty dramatic increase. 22% are black, and the remaining 11% identify as a different race, mostly Hispanic. When it comes to community and parental involvement, All subjects interviewed made mention of how the school has grown from a tight knit, very relational center of the community to one that's less personal. In some ways, this was due to growth, in others, due to curricular changes, and then still others were due to leadership changes. In Jimmy's discussion about past administrators, she mentions how Mr. Hemphill was part of what made the school feel so close. He was the first principal discussed amongst all of our interviewers. That was the farthest back their history with the school went. They were Jimmy said, we felt like a family, and we knew he had our backs. We wanted to do our very best for him because he expected it and wanted the best for the students, not the numbers. A comparison between numbers and a community is a big theme in a lot of these interviews that we had. The inclusion of dual enrollment has, according to Cynthia, led to students moving through the curriculum faster, and so they identify less with their school. She's quoted as saying, "I am not an advocate for dual enrollment. I think the kids don't have that love for their school. I understand people do it for free college, that I get, but I think it's hurting the school. They're losing that experience." That was full disclosure, though. That was when I asked specifically for their hottest take on education. Parents are seen now as holding their students to a different standard in terms of responsibility and behavioral expectations. So Cynthia said, "Before the computer, I felt like we talked to the kids more. Yes, the kids owned it better because they would come up with little sheets or notebooks or whatever, and you would write it down." According to Cynthia, this led to a shift in responsibility among students and parents, saying, "I would talk more to the kids instead of mama, whose phone would ring anytime I put a grade in, and they would call me immediately. They're kids, but they can keep up with their own grades." In some ways, leadership was a factor. However, Cynthia pointed out, "I think we give in to parents way too much." I actually had an administrator tell me one time, my job was not to teach accountability. My job was to teach math. A lot of what was discussed in this had to do with access to technology, like access to grades, but also a shift in leadership and how much they saw themselves as part of that school, or the school as part of them.
How has recent history shaped what Harlem High School is today? I like to focus on 5 dimensions of Harlem and compare and contrast the then versus now based on our interviews and other information available. The school model as a whole has shifted from a comprehensive and vocational identity to one that is more about preparing all students for a college prep diploma. Reasons for this change will be outlined in the assessment curriculum dimension. A couple of notes about this dimension. Harlem has the second fewest career and technical pathways available in our district, and only one pathway more than Lakeside High School, which houses the district's IB program. So although the quantity has diminished, though, the quality remains, as Harlem students routinely place well in state competitions within the pathways that we actually do have. For the curricular dimension, teachers used to be driven by a textbook and curriculum map and had more autonomy in what and how they taught their subjects. But in 1985, the state of Georgia introduced the Quality Core Curriculum, the first iteration of statewide education standards, which have evolved through the Georgia Performance Standards and to what we have now as the Georgia Standards of Excellence. Over the past several years, Harlem and other district teachers have been tasked with taking these standards and forming curriculum and pacing guides to compile into a academic curriculum of excellence, or what we call ACE, for Columbia County schools. And data has taken center stage in recent years. During my first few years of teaching, there was actually an entire room at Harlem dedicated to just displaying data of all kinds for any kind of sort of analysis that they chose to do, which kind of leads me into the next dimension of assessment culture. There used to be very few, if any, public metrics for student achievement and growth. There were the writing and graduation tests, which were introduced in 1994. And then others started to be piled on, like end-of-course test, EOCTs, and student learning objectives. The state now only mandates the Georgia Milestones Assessment, but our district is in the process of implementing benchmarks and common semester exams for every high school course, where achievement data gets shared between teachers at the school and district level. At Harlem specifically, we face pressure to participate in giving students an option for something called credit repair from the first semester if they ended up with an average between a 60 and a 69. This ultimately amounts to a checklist of things students have to do to repair their grade and get it changed to a 70. And in most cases is not an accurate reflection of mastery or learning. The current administration at Harlem has made it clear through communications about these assessments and policies that we value optics over growth and learning. Technology advancement is not something that is Harlem specific, but just like everywhere else, it has a profound impact on our students' education. To start with the pros, technological tools allow students to see multiple representations of content. In science specifically, for Cody, Laura, and I, it is extremely helpful for students to see animations of processes and phenomena that we would otherwise be explaining through drawings or still images. As for the cons, cellular devices have fundamentally changed how our students' brains are wired. Online content and materials can be beneficial for students who actually use them to study or if they're absent. But our district has now set up a multi-step approval process for even using online programs that can take up to a year to get approved due to limited meetings and other red tape. Communication has evolved as well. Grades used to be periodically distributed through paper reports, but now are instantly available for both students and parents 24/7. Even with consistent grade updates, though, throughout the semester, we still have a culture of students waiting until the very end to ask for any sort of extra help or extra credit. The opposite also occurs, where, as seen in some of our interviews, that some of our interviewees have gotten contacted by parents within minutes of posting grades, and that can be just a stressful situation. So having been at Harlem for 12 years now, there are only a handful of teachers that have been here longer than me, and we are in a particular state of flux at the moment. Our administration is about to go through some changes due to retirement, and our campus is receiving multi-million-dollar modernization updates that will completely change its footprint in just 2 years. And I believe I speak for my entire group, Cody, Laura, and I, that we are excited for what changes may come and hope that they bring the quality, or that they improve the quality of the educational experience for our students.